Really looking forward to this fight between Max Payne Griffin and Ramiz Brahimaj at 170 pounds. And a lot of people might not be familiar with the fighter to our right-hand side. And Ramiz Brahimaj, he was supposed to make his UFC debut back in June against Takashi Sato. Unfortunately, Brahimaj out of that fight because he had a cornerman that tested positive for COVID-19. It ended up Ramiz Brahimaj contracted COVID-19 over the summer after the fact. Now that delayed his UFC debut a little bit more, and he was supposed to be on Contender Series in 2019 against Miguel Baeza, and a really weird story. And if you want to kind of get into the weeds on that one, he had a great interview with our pal JHK MMA with SCMP, and he described it perfectly. And it's a sad story, really, because Ramiz Brahimaj, he was kind of going through those pre-fight tests, and they found a tumor behind one of his eyes. So of course, he scratched from that fight, and that was on a card that had Baeza got a win, gets into the UFC. There were a lot of really good fighters on that card, so it would have been a good springboard. But for Ramiz Brahimaj, I mean, practice makes perfect, I guess, and he gets an opportunity this much later. Now, I mean, he's had wild camps. He's been getting ready for a lot of different opponents, but he definitely has a good gym to lean on in Fortis MMA. Saif Saud really putting out some great prospects. And I mean, you don't have to look any further than Max Griffin's second to last fight, where we saw one of Ramiz Brahimaj's teammates and Alex Morono taking on Griffin. And I remember when Saif Saud, you get the corner cam, then he goes, something like, I think the call was 11-2. Morono goes 1-2 high kick, and it rocks Max Griffin so hard. And we've seen it from Saif Saud. I mean, you had it in the main event last weekend, Anderson Silva against Uriah Hall. Worked out pretty good for Uriah Hall having Saif Saud in his corner. So Ramiz Brahimaj, I mean, 8-2, all 8 of those wins by submission. He's a jiu-jitsu brown belt. He's competed and medaled at Worlds in Jiu-Jitsu, so you definitely know that he has that strength with him. But also, again, the training partners he have at the gym. I mean, we can go through them on and on and on. But Fortis MMA slowly becoming one of the biggest gyms in the world at turning out great prospects. So Ramiz Brahimaj definitely going to get done on the ground. Max Griffin, Matt, if we could really describe him in one word, I would say difficult.
So Max Griffin is a really unique case because he's one of these fighters who, when he's walking out, the commentary team's going to be talking about, oh, his boxing is absurd. He's got really nice hands. Going to remind you of a Calvin Kattar, perhaps. And then you watch all of his fights, and he shoots for a lot of takedowns and does have a lot of clinch control. And it's really weird that always the talking point around Max Griffin is his boxing. And let's be honest, he does have good boxing. We saw that in the Mike Perry fight, and I think that's an important fight to bring up because Mike Perry, yes, he's, known for his crazy antics and whatnot, but if he catches you clean on the chin, you're going to go to sleep. And Max Griffin was just able to fight a really smart fight, move out of the way of those big looping shots, and really use his boxing effectively, find his shots down the middle. He was able to drop and really just beat the brakes off poor Mike Perry in that one. For Brahimaj, this is an interesting fight because I would say Takashi Sato does everything Max Griffin does, but a little bit better. I don't think he wrestles offensively as good as Max Griffin, but I would say his striking is much more developed. It's much more dynamic. He has a much more developed kicking game as well, because with Griffin, you really have to focus on his boxing, which again is very good, and then his wrestling. But other than that, he's not going to go out there throw a ton of kicks. He is starting to incorporate more and more. He has started using more leg kicks, but it's still not nearly enough of his game, and that's something that's always going to worry me, because at the welterweight division, you have to think, Vicente Luque is barely in the top 15, and let's say you have to fight him at some point. He's going to kick your front leg 75 times, and if you don't have an answer to that, whether it be a check or a leg kick of your own, I think that's really going to it worries me at least going forward in his career. And on the streak that he's on, listen, he's 1-4 in his last 5. You think if there's ever a time to pull out a new trick or a new wrinkle in your game, it would be right now. So hopefully we do see something a little different from Max Griffin, but this is a really great opportunity for Brahimaj because if Max Griffin is having trouble on the feet, he will start to shoot for takedowns himself, and then that can create a lot of scrambles that could be beneficial for Brahimaj.
It seems like every Max Griffin fight you watch, you're right. They talk about his boxing, and he gets rocked. And then he comes back after getting rocked. It's like it just kind of shakes the cobwebs out of his head, and you better hope that somebody doesn't finish Max Griffin. You make a really good point. Now, I made a mistake last week, and I'll own up to it. You look at the fight between Miles Johns and Kevin Natividad. It was the first fight on the card. And I was really hard on Miles Johns because in his UFC and Dana White's Contender Series fights, he hadn't thrown a leg kick, which was insane. Now, he threw a couple against Kevin Natividad, but it was that great uppercut that finished the fight for him. You look at Max Griffin in his last 4 fights, the most, by percentage, the most leg kicks he threw was in that Morono fight. They amounted to 12% of his total strikes. Other than that, we're talking under 10% of his total strikes are from leg kicks. And if you watch him fight, he moves side to side very well. He has a really wide stance too, so a lot of wrestlers would have a hard time trying to take down Max Griffin because he's so wide. You see guys going and they reach for that lead leg, they go for a single. Max Griffin can stuff the head and push them down, get clinched up against the cage, and then switch position on them. The one thing that he doesn't do well, though, when he does that, and I mean, it's almost flawless the way he does it every time, except for this one part. When he gets him flipped around, he stays in that clinch. He has a lot more success when he pushes off and gets back in range and starts boxing again, but he rarely does it. He'll keep it clinched up. Maybe he'll work for a takedown of its own. But you look at Max Griffin, and I mean, the trouble for me, and we've talked about this before this video, Matt, you look at some of the losses. Chidi and Joe Kawani, hey man, LFA champ now. Colby Covington, Eliseo Zaleski, Curtis Millender, Alves, Morono, Oliveira. The problem for me, 1-4 in his last 5. Not to say that those fights aren't close. The Thiago Alves fight, you could argue it either way. The Morono fight, I mean, he won a round in that fight. And the Alex Oliveira fight, yeah, it was a split decision loss. To me, I had scored at round 1 for Griffin, rounds 2 and 3 for Oliveira. It was weird the way that the judges scored the third round for Griffin. He ended the round on top, but he was only there for about a minute and a half and didn't land a whole lot. He had that terrible cut above his eyebrow. Yeah. So for me, Max Griffin, I know exactly what I'm going to get. I'm going to get some pretty good boxing. He doesn't land a ton of combinations with a lot more single shots than anything. Coming out of Team Alpha Male, he cross-trains between gyms, but we see him over on the Instagrams spending a lot of time at Team Alpha Male. Has quite a few teammates on this card as well. Darren Elkins taking on Eduardo Garagori. And on the right-hand side, again, Ramiz Brahimaj. It's not that his striking isn't great. You can see him there with the hybrid boxing gloves on, but he's mostly well-known for his jiu-jitsu. Can you get Max Griffin down? Can you submit him? Sure, you could, but we really haven't seen it. He's only been submitted once in his career. If we have a look at the odds, Matt, Max Griffin, a slight favorite, or I would say a slight. He opened up the minus 195 favorite. The money's been coming in on Brahimaj, and right now, Max Griffin minus 163 on best fight odds. For Ramiz Brahimaj, open to plus 160. He's now at a plus 135. If we look over on Tapology for the total votes so far, 713 votes, 73%. Going with Max Griffin, 84% predicting him to get the win by decision. I think, you know, you look at the Tapology votes, you look at the odds. I'm in agreement with both of them. It doesn't have to do with just those. That's not the influence there. But again, I know what I'm going to get out of Max Griffin. His last win was over Zalim Mamadiev, who definitely wasn't UFC caliber. The guy got the piss kicked out of him every single time they carted the poor guy out. Had a great record over in Russia, not so much in the UFC. But with Max Griffin, again, with the volume and the defense of wrestling, those are the things that I really like. And if I have a look at Max Griffin's overall body of work, if you want a total 66% takedown defense, 55% accuracy, those are halfway decent. And I mean, as far as the striking metrics, a negative strike differential just by a bit. But Max Griffin likes to get into wars. If Ramiz Brahimaj can kind of withstand the pressure and really work the submissions from the ground, the guy's slippery, we've seen it, but I think that he's going to have a hard time adjusting to Max Griffin and his pace.
I agree. I really can't break it down better. I do think the pace of Max Griffin is going to be a really big problem for Ramiz Brahimaj, and I do think it comes down to the wrestling defense of Max Griffin. And up until this point in the UFC, I know they talk about his boxing all the time, but his wrestling defense, and really just his wrestling in general, has been one of the more surprising parts of his game. So, I mean, Colby Covington took him down, but that's really been the only guy. So,
and Mike Perry.
Yeah, and Colby Covington's going to do that. Mike Perry, you know, he's pretty okay. So I do think Max Griffin, he'll probably be able to get the win. I do think cardio is really going to be the key to this fight. If he does show up in kind of regular Max Griffin, have that sort of steady output in the first round, just get your rhythm and sort of ramp it up as the fight goes on, you should be able to get it done.
And I mean, if not, Max Griffin could be on the chopping block, 1-4 in his last 5, Matt. We're really looking forward to this fight. We both have Max Griffin, but a great opportunity for Fortis MMA's Ramiz Brahimaj. With a win, hey, you're setting yourself up pretty well. So we're really looking forward to this card. We've got a great main event between Thiago Santos and Glover Teixeira. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say.
Let's get into it.